intelligencesquared.com.
So my name is Bernard Henri Lévy. My English has not improved since the last time, I fear. But since the last time, I happened to live a strange, unforgettable, maybe unforgivable also, and extraordinary experience. I will not enter in the details of this experience. You had some of them through the newspapers, maybe during the last year. In a few words, the experience was the following. I happened to enter in Libya, to smuggle myself in Libya at the very eve, on the very first days of the uprising against Muammar Gaddafi. I happened to be probably the first foreigner to meet the man who was at this time the secret leader of the insurrection, of the uprising. I happened to connect myself, and I say happen because all this is a series of circumstances, of sort of miracles which I cannot relate in another way than saying that it happened that. It happened that I connected myself to the president of my country, France, with whom I never spoke since years. And not only we no longer spoke since his election, but we were in really non-speaking terms. It happened that when I asked him genuinely, and being completely not only moved but destroyed by all that I saw on my road from the Egyptian border to Benghazi, all the traces of massacres, of bloodbath, of summary executions which I witnessed. When full of that, I asked to the president of my country if he would accept to receive in France the man whom I just met, who was President he was not even president because the NTC was not yet constituted. But let's say the future president of the NTC, Mustafa Abdel Jalil. It happened that Nicolas Sarkozy told me, why not? When I told him, why not, what does it mean? He told me, bring them. It happened that when I brought the representative of the NTC in Paris, France, after the consultation of David Cameron, who was the only one to be in the secret, decided as a thunderstorm to recognize the NTC and to declare the non-legitimacy of Muammar Gaddafi. It happened that in the following weeks, returning to Benghazi, introducing myself in complicated ways to the besieged city of Misrata, besieged and at this time cut off from the world, from the rest of the world. I achieved, I was able to take out of Libya again some commanders, some of free officers, the defenders of Misrata, for example, and take them again to France and to Sarkozy. It happened that I was in September in Tripoli and in Benghazi with Nicolas Sarkozy and David Cameron on a day which was not a day of glory, because a war is never a glory even when it ends, but which was a day of relief and a day of freedom. All this happened to me during this incredible and strange year, 2011. In other words, it happened that I was eyewitness of probably the most extraordinary event which I lived in my life, and of one of the most unexpected events for all of us, which was a revolution in Libya and in the Arab world. So what I want to do tonight, before listening to, replying to your questions, I would like to tell you in a few remarks what theoretical, philosophical lessons I draw from this moment of our time and of my modest life. I witnessed all that. I followed all that. Sometimes I did a little more than follow. And when I look back, when I try to recollect these months of madness, I think that I am able today to draw a few general conclusions, which is what I would like to deliver to you tonight. The first conclusion I draw of all that happened in Libya is that, contrary to so many birds of bad omen believed, contrary to what thought all the relativists or culturalist thinkers, the desire of liberty is universal. Already in the 60s, in the 70s, there was the belief in a big part of the West and of the intelligentsia, the belief according to which all the central and eastern part of Europe was in the darkness forever, and that the desire of freedom had been eradicated from the minds of the Homo Sovieticus. 1989, the proof was given to the world that the words of liberty was like the frozen words of Rabelais. The frozen words, you have mammoth which are frozen, you have pieces of dinosaur which are frozen, but you have also some words which are frozen. And when there is a defreezing, the words revive. This happened in the Soviet Union and is still happening at the very minute we are speaking, by the way. And this happened in the Central Europe, and this suddenly, to the surprise of all the observers, it happened to the Arab world. There was a sort of unwritten law, a sort of unsaid theorem, saying that there was an Arab exception, that the ideas of liberty which were bred by Europe, which had their nest and their origin in the West, were not made for this part of the planet. The relativists lost the game. The universalists did win the party. The proof is given that there are some universal values, some universal wishes which have nothing to do with places, times, and circumstances. In the language of French philosophy, it is the victory of Julien Binda against Charles Maurras. It is the victory of those who believe that mankind is one and that there are some wishes and therefore some rights which are valuable wherever. This happened in Libya. And for all the skeptical, for all the birds of bad omen, it was a bad surprise. For me, it was, of course, a great surprise. The second philosophical lesson is that the victory of liberty, the fact that the job of being a dictator is no longer a good job, that it is a dangerous one. See what is happening with Bashar al-Assad, and think of what might be happening to another dictator of today, who is Vladimir Putin. I make a bet today. I think that the dictator of Russia, the man who is personally responsible of killing 1/5 of the population of Chechnya, 200,000 dead in a country which counted 1 million at this time, the man whom we Westerners believed to be shaping a sort of new pattern of society, a new model of capitalism, a new engine for the growth of the world, the man whom we thought able to save the euro, to buy our debts with his Chinese buddy. I name Vladimir Putin, Chinese buddy Hu Jintao. I think that this man will know very hard times in the year which will soon begin. He will know a very hard time. He will have a very hard time. The job of being a dictator is becoming a very hard job. And the Gaddafi model, the lesson of Gaddafi, might be heard, and are heard, I'm sure, till Petersburg and Moscow. But the second philosophical lesson is that if it is true that there is a new wind of freedom all over the world, if it is true that the ideals of democracy, free speech, right for a body and for a soul not to be tortured are on the wave of victory, it is not true that this should mean a sort of end of history. It is not true that we are entering in a world where a sort of great song of freedom will be sung in the same tone by the same orchestra all over the world. I don't believe in the end of history. I believe that the wave of freedom, which we saw devastating the dictatorship of Libya, opens a new space of time, if I dare say, a new sequence of time, which will be occupied by new forms of political shocks, not the shock some believed in the past, not the shock between the West and the rest, not the shock between the Western world and the world of Islam, but shocks inside the world of Islam, shock inside Libya, for example, which is the case I know best, between liberals and fundamentalists, between secularists and Islamists, between various ways of living the Muslim faith, and so on. There is today a real battle going on, a real political quarrel raging inside Islam, this world of Islam which was frozen by the dictatorships being removed one after the other. And in Syria, it will not last very long now. In the defreezing of that, you have real clashes which are taking place and the end of which one cannot predict. So, second philosophical lesson, the entry in the world, not of the non-history, as Fukuyama, Alexandre Kojève, or Hegel said, but of real history. The return of history in this part of the world which was supposed to be as a corpse, as a cadaver, which was supposed to be a sort of frozen body. The third lesson of this Libyan affair for me is the following. I think that there is in our countries, in the West, in Europe, and especially in America, in UK, and in France, one debate which prevails on my point of view on the others, which is much more important than being leftist or rightist, for example, which has still a meaning, but which is maybe more important than right and left, conservative of liberal or liberal, and so on, which is the debate between what we call in France, I don't know what would be the equivalent in English, the souverainisme, and en français, in French, le souverainisme et l'ingérence. Souverainism meaning that a man or a woman is defined, of course, by his rights, but these rights are themselves defined, shaped, patterned according to the space, the borders around this space, the state which governs this space, where the man or the woman happens to be born and to live. There is a theory which comes from very far away in history, which goes to Hegel, which believes that the state-nation, nation as embodied in a state, is the last word of mankind and therefore of human rights. One has rights, but they are defined in the frame, in the limits of a nation, of a state. They are defended by this state, they are limited by it, and so on. This is sovereignty. Rights have to do with borders. Everybody has rights, but these rights are defined by this frame. On the other hand, you have the partisans of ingérence, in France, involvement, or internationalism, or I don't know how you would say it in English. Those who believe that there are some rights which do not rely on, which do not depend of the belonging to a state, a nation, a part of the world, which transcend all that. And that humanity as itself is the guardian of these rights. And that, for example, when a state betrays its vocation, its duty to protect the rights of its citizens, there is a right. It is not an exception. It is a right. There is a right for the rest of the humanity, expressed in a way which depends on circumstances, a right to intervene and to decrete the illegitimacy of the state concerned. This is a great debate everywhere in America between the Jacksonians, the Jeffersonians, the Hamiltonians, and the Wilsonians, who share the foreign policy of America since the beginning of the American Republic. The real debate is this one. Those who believe that the task that every people has rights, but it is the problem of their state, and the idea that America has something to say, has a message to deliver in some occasions to the rest of the world. In England, probably the same, and in France, even more. Libya signs the victory of involvement against sovereignism. Libya signs the fact, and it is the first time in modern history, that the international community decided and acted in consequence that she has a duty and a right to intervene in a country which has in principle a sovereign state when this sovereignty is exerted in a way which is barbarous. It is the first time. We had many wars in the past, in the 20th century, in the 19th centuries. There was war of conquest, there were wars for empires, there were wars for interest, there were wars for vital space. But a war which is only dictated by the idea that human consciousness is deeply concerned, may be interpolated by a bloodbath in a remote little country which was nearly unknown by most of the diplomats of the world. This sort of war was really a new one. The war which was not waged in the Balkans, in Bosnia. It was waged, yes, but 200,000 dead too late, which was not even thought in Chechnya. The world really let Putin go to the end of his target, and so on. This war was waged in Libya. And this is a real change, a real move, a real revolution in the way of thinking of the West. It is the first time that the wish, the right, and the duty of involvement prevails on the resignation to sovereignism, prevails on the famous word of Goebbels, who said in 1938 that Charbonnier est maître chez soi. Charbonnier, the coal man, is master at home. He does what he wants. The rights of the state crown the rights of the man, and the second depend on the first one. So this is a real theoretical, philosophical lesson which has to be drawn and can be drawn from this Libyan event. And the fact the signature of the signature, the proof, the ultimate proof that this happened appeared a few days ago. The signature, the real testimony, test of this final victory, that the game is over, that the sovereignist lost the game. It was achieved a few days ago when a group of countries which are not Western countries, which are Arab countries, and which are assembled inside the Arab League, decided to implement sanctions, to exhort a dictator, Bashar al-Assad, to stop the bloodbath, and decided that it was their affair. This day, the duty of involvement, the right of ingérence, stopped to be a Western idea built by a few neo-colonialist intellectuals, as it was said. It stopped to be a disguised imperialist idea since it was endorsed by the Arab League. And this date, this moment when the Arab League implemented sanctions on Bashar al-Assad, was the real victory of what a few intellectuals in Europe, people like Bernard Kouchner in the 70s, and others in England, in France, including myself, what we dreamt during so many years, what we saw fail so many times, prevailed and won in Libya. Libya was a victory of freedom of the Libyan people, first of all, of course. Libya was the victory of bodies promised to carnage, to massacre, to the rivers of blood, promised that by Gaddafi and his son, but it was also the victory of an idea. Sometimes ideas go on horseback under your window and you recognize them. This idea of this humanitarian involvement, of this right of international community to implement it, was embodied and prevailed. And this is a real revolution. The other lesson of this history, I would sum it up by saying that this Libyan revolution, this Libyan war, at the end, when you consider it on a whole, as a whole story, proves something very strange. That not a few men, but a few desires, a few wishes, desire, can really change the face of the world. Because when I remember these months of night, of darkness, with sometimes some sparks of light here and there, when I remember the United Nations Council, like for Syria today, with countries shameless defending the dictator, China, Russia, maybe already Brazil, I don't know, Germany, very neutral. The Security Council, the United Nations, believed from the bottom of their being that Gaddafi was all right, that he kept the machinery and the country quiet, and that he had to do the job he thought he had to do. The public opinions in Europe and in France, for example, did not understand why this war was waged. And when it was understood, very often, the public opinion was against. The crisis was so deep, unemployment growing, this war did cost so much. What do we have to do in these remote deserts of Libya? I think it was the same in England, and I know it was the same in America, and it is one of the reasons why Obama chose this strange form of leadership by behind. This war was not popular at all. The diplomats, the big diplomatic bureaucracies of the main countries involved did not want. It was not in their habit. It was not their way of thinking. There is a diplomatic way of viewing the world, which consists in saying things are not so bad, things are improving, and things will turn well at the end. This is a diplomatic way of thinking. It was the way in which Libya was seen. So the diplomats were against. The public opinion was against. The Arab countries were against. I remember my surprise when I went out of Libya in some of my trips there. I went through Egypt. I met some Egyptian leaders, responsible statesmen. They had the most powerful army of the area, financed by huge amounts of American money, billions of dollars every year. They were close. They controlled the border. They could, in 1 minute, get rid of the army of mercenaries of Gaddafi. They could, in 1 minute, give support and secure their so-called Libyan brothers. They did not do. No neighbor of Libya was ready to give the help. So, if you look at the story, you see that finally, this unique war, this first humanitarian intervention in history, this revenge from Bosnia, Darfur, Bangladesh, Chechnya, this revenge of the damned of these wars, this revenge, yes, was due to a few men and women. In France, Nicolas Sarkozy. I'm not a supporter of him. I was not in 2007. I will probably not be in 2012. But I must confess that the way this man, as Jacques Lacan would say, n'a pas cédé sur son désir, did not withdraw on his own desire, did not recede on his own desire, was so strange, so unusual, and so full of merit. In England, there was one man. Again, I don't think that if I was British, I would be his supporter. But I saw him in Tripoli. I saw him in Benghazi. I observed him. David Cameron, again. As Nicolas Sarkozy said yesterday, in an interview in Le Monde, he spoke of the courage of David Cameron. And I must say again that the consistency of his desire, the way he proceeded and pursued his own desire is very customary, is very rare in modern history. This history relied on the desire of a third man, who is not the least important. when you think about it. There was Sarkozy, there was Cameron, but in order to have them build an international coalition, in order to have them go to United Nations and compel the ambassadors of the state members to vote a resolution or to abstain, which Sarkozy and Cameron did, in order to have all that, you had to have, prior to all this, the desire of a last man, who is Mustafa Abdel Jalil. This man, again, said what, at the time where I speak, the Syrian opponents to Bashar al-Assad did not say. He asked what no Arab leader ever asked, at his own risks, putting himself probably in great danger. He did ask. And I know that I bear testimony of this because I am the one who conveyed the message. He did ask for a Western intervention. He did ask to press the stop button, as somebody here would say, to one of the worst plagues of our time, which is a supposed clash between the West and the Arab world. He asked for an intervention. So the lesson is also that a few men can change the course of history, that a few human desires pulled to them last extremes consequences can be right against all the bureaucracies, all the international technocracies, all the big animals of the big public opinion. A few can be right against all these big things. And this again is a philosophical lesson, and this again is a lesson of hope for those who, like me, were accustomed to the reverse, were accustomed to see the desires of the women and men of goodwill to break themselves on the rock of the machine, of the thing with a big T, the big T of the big thing. For the first time, it was the contrary. And for me, it was such a moment, such a surprise, and such a joy. I see myself seeing Cameron and seeing Sarkozy in Benghazi, with in my memory the destroyed bodies, the ruined souls, the desertified gazes of so many victims, of so many forgotten wars I happened to see and to cover in my life. They were like little ghosts with very sad smiles, looking at this incredible event, which was some Western countries having made alliance with some Arab countries, Emirates, Qatar, and so on, and having won a battle for the right and for the liberty. And what I can say also, and it will be my last remark, It was a big surprise for me, of course, but I think that it was a big surprise also in the Muslim world, and even in the most extreme fringes of the Muslim world. I'm not the friend, I have really no friendly feelings toward the extremists of Islam. You know that, and for me, I did not change one iota of my thoughts since the last time I came to speak here, since my investigation on Daniel Pearl and so on. And I really believe that those who use Islam as a tool to implement or to cover or to justify humiliation, inequality between men and women, or crime, are double criminals against the women and men whom they offend and against the faith which they offend too. But what I saw in Libya, I met some of these people. I met probably the most radical Islamists of Libya, which are now in this ideological battle I told you before, trying to increase their weight, maybe defeated, we'll see. I met them. And even in their eyes, even in their brain fed with the old ideology of the West being guilty by essence, being their enemy for eternity, pursuing no other target than offending and humiliating them, they discovered the face of a West who had the face of Cameron, of Sarkozy, of the Brits, the French, the Norwegian pilots, fighting elbow to elbow with Emirati pilots, targeting some tanks which were at the edge of committing mass massacres against innocent civilians. And suddenly, I saw that for them too it was a huge surprise. The image of the Westerner being metaphysically their enemy, being by essence and substance, aiming at the defeat and the humiliation of Islam, suddenly did not disappear, but was seriously weakened. So to end, I would say that this war in Libya was also the first real defeat of this ideology of the clash of civilization, which was driven by some American scholars, which was endorsed by some Arab activists, Al-Qaeda, Huntington on one side, Al-Qaeda on the other, the clash of civilization. The first defeat of this idea, the first serious defeat, the first military defeat, the first concrete defeat was this war in Libya. When Obama pronounced his big speech in Cairo, he spoke against the clash of civilization. When there were many occasions where good Western leaders spoke against that, but the concrete defeat, the defeat on the ground, the first one, the first time that this clash has not been seen as a fatality was this war in Libya. And for this reason too, this event is a real seminal event of the 21st century, and we are only beginning to see and to conceive its political and philosophical consequences. Voilà, these were my preliminary remarks. I hope they provoke some observations, questions, and I would be more than happy to try to reply.